The comment is from our friend Brian Urbanski.
Mhm.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. He's asking about how Welcome Home participants can continue to network and stay in touch with each other after the program.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and
Well,
one of us can answer that in the chat, but the Hoover app actually allows folks to stay in contact with each other.
mhm.
The last year, we had several people who we met through the Building Bridges that we've never met in person. And we actually ended up scheduling meetings and having conversations after this entire event was over to continue to build upon some of the things that we started to discuss in during Building Bridges last year. So at some point I can respond to Brian or somebody else can.
Okay.
And actually, I don't know if Brian, I guess Brian can probably hear us. So since I think Brian is in person in Columbus.
Oh,
But
nice. Okay.
Yes, we can also send him an email as well to talk about that. But he's absolutely right. I'm sure he's making a lot of contacts and folks are probably very happy to connect with he and Jody.
Beautiful.
All right.
Well, it's 10:45. You
All
all ready
right.
to get started?
So are we ready to get started?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we shall. So I would like to, if I can, open up with a brief prayer. My name is Ernest Stockton. I'm the regional coordinator for the ODRC Office of Reentry, and I'll be facilitating our session and then what steps you can take to assist in the reentry process today. Okay, so could everyone just please offer a moment of silence just for a brief prayer, and then we'll jump right into some house rules and we'll go forward, okay? Thank you. Father God, we thank you right now, Father God, for allowing this session to prevail with Welcome Home. We thank you for building bridges of opportunity for this community experience. We thank you for the ODRC, their hand in and around your reentry. And we just ask that everyone gets, gives, and receives all they can to help us move forward in moving this discussion and turning everything into action and making our communities better. We thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Okay, so again, I want to just let everyone know that this is being recorded, this session. Right now it's being recorded. I want to again tell you my name is Ernest Stockton, Reentry Coordinator for the ODRC. I want to welcome you, the participants. I see we have many for joining us today. I want to let you know that if you are in the wrong session, you can simply end the session and get back to your Hoover agenda, and then you can select the appropriate session. Okay, the chat feature is still active, so we'll point out the mute button. Please keep your speakers muted if you can until the Q&A we'll have conducted at the end. And you can also enter questions in our chat room and we'll get back with you as soon as we can with that. Also, I want to let you know that this is a guided discussion. So the presentation and everything will flow accordingly. Myself being your facilitator, along with the presenters, will answer and guide things accordingly as we can, okay? So I just want to start off, again, welcoming you to the And Then What presentation, where we're going to walk you through services, expanding different ministries, reentry sessions, and go through the 4-step framework for being most effective reentry program possible. So I want to start off by asking our presenters. We have with you today, Deputy Director of ODRC's Office of Reentry, Ronnie Burks, as well as Dr. Roxanne Coey. She's the Assistant Deputy Director. And I'll ask them to briefly introduce themselves, where they're from, or what they do, and how they serve in this experience. Ronnie?
Good morning, Ernest, and thank you so much for helping us facilitate the session. As Ernest said, I'm Ronnie Burks, Trousdale, and I am the Deputy Director in the Office of Reentry. I have the great pleasure of working with Ernest and Roxanne and some other dynamic staff within our office, and to help bring reentry opportunities to men and women, reentry resources to men and women who are incarcerated in our 28 correctional facilities across the state of Ohio, as well as in folks that are in the community. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Ernest, and good morning to everyone. I see some friends on the workshop, so I would like to welcome everybody. I'm Roxanne Coy. I am the Assistant Deputy Director in ODRC's Office of Reentry, and I echo everything that Ronnie said. And I think one of the wonderful things that we get the privilege of doing in our office is working with many restored men and women. And we've been able to build relationships and just talk to them and have very frank and open conversations. And they've just gifted, I want to say gifted Ronnie and I and the entire team with sharing their knowledge and their experiences with us. So we hope that we do all restored men and women justice with this presentation today.
Thank you both for that wonderful introduction. As you see on your screen there, those are our wonderful presenters for today. I wanted to start this session off. Of course, we're talking about, again, our subject topic is stable housing, safe, stable housing. With experiences and perspective, I want to talk about why it is important for people coming home to have safe and stable housing. Can we start there and elaborate on that a little bit from the ODRC's perspective?
So Ernest, it certainly is important for men and women to have safe and supportive and stable and respectful housing, because reentry starts with housing, honestly. I don't know anyone that can be and has been successful that that don't have safe and supportive and stable and respectful housing. I was teaching at a class last night at Cedarville University, and I was speaking at a class at Cedarville University and spoke to a group of students. And I said in the classroom to these students, raise your hand if you think you could be successful if you were homeless. And not one hand went up. And we know why. We know that it all starts with housing, when folks have a safe place to lay their heads. But Ernest, we're also going to talk about actually our presentation is about and then what, to talk about the services that we offer, but in addition to talk about what our community partners can do to help assist us. Roxanne and I were having a conversation, Ernest, one day, and we talked about all the partners that come into our facilities and they pour into our men and women and they do all these wonderful things. And then our men and women get ready to go home and we're like, and then what? And then what? Then what do you do in the community? Are you there waiting for them when they come home? Are you there to help guide them or navigate them through the reentry process in the community? Are you there to encourage them, to support them, to offer resources? And so that's one of the things that we're going to talk about today, that will include some nuggets about housing and employment and all those other things as well.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. And before we move forward in the and then what, can we elaborate a little bit on the Office of Reentry's mission? I see we have those 4 beautiful core values up there. Can we just really explain that? Because that really looks and fits in the direction of what we're doing today and what we're talking about.
Absolutely. So I think Ronnie talked about our core values in the opening session this morning. Hope is job one team, one purpose. We all have to work together. Civility towards all, no matter who you are, and take care of our staff, and they will transform our incarcerated population. I think that with the Office of Reentry during the pandemic, we had some time to slow down a little bit from driving everywhere and really talk about what it is that we want to focus on. What is our mission? What is our vision? And what we came up with is that our mission in ODRC's Office of Reentry is to connect. Ernest, it's to connect individuals with communities, with programs, with services. And we're going to talk a little bit about that pre-entry or reentry preparation versus actual reentry. And so this mission is really focused on that ongoing process of reentry, of connecting men and women. And our vision is to facilitate successful reintegration for individuals. And we do that through partnerships, through relationships with everybody, with partners, with institutions, with restored men and women, anybody doing this work. And so that's really where our mission and vision in the Office of Reentry was born from. Just really taking a hard look at what is it that we're supposed to be doing or need to be doing.
Okay, thank you so much, Roxanne. I appreciate that. So it says here, reentry preparation versus reentry. What would you, right now, in terms of reentry preparation, I know someone's going to read through this, but what would you consider one of the most challenging realities for the reentering individuals that's been justice involved? What would be the most challenging?
I see Ronnie's muted. Ronnie, I'm just going to jump in if that's okay. Here's what I think, Ernest, in talking with men and women in the institutions and talking with restored men and women going through a reentry process. And Ronnie may have a different point of view, but my perspective is that reentry preparation really may not be happening to the extent and depth of what we would like it, and what men and women who have been released tell us where it needs to be. And so we have, and I put the slide, reentry preparation versus reentry, two very different processes, right? Very different. So reentry preparation occurs prior to release. People are getting things in order. They're learning about what will be expected. Here's the your paperwork for supervision. It's got some rules on it, okay, but really it's not really explaining what's really going to happen. And so people take programming, they get vocational training. And so there's some very tangible things that people do. But when we've talked to men and women about what was your release planning process, what were your thoughts, what happened before you left, we've learned that some men and women have had, oh, I'm going to go here. Well, that plan was in their head, and it wasn't really communicated so much with the people that it impacted in society that they were going to. So they had a plan, and it was almost a secret. It's a strong word, but it wasn't really communicated well. And maybe family members and friends had a plan too, but that was a secret too. And so they weren't connecting when men and women come out. And so that's when conflict arises. And so the reentry preparation process, what I really want to stress today, and I think Ronnie would agree, is really thinking, really planning, and really communicating. And if you're having a difficult time communicating that, connect, let us connect you, help us help you connect with the men and women that you may be going home to, the family members, the daughters, the grandparents, the husbands, the wives. Let us really connect, because reentry preparation, I think I'm going to say it, I think is not really done to the extent that we would like it to be done, not for our benefit, but for the benefit of the men and women going home.
Absolutely.
Ronnie,
Roxanne, you know what I was thinking about, and Roxanne will remember this. We were at Mansfield Correctional Institution, and it was a reentry program that they were having in the evening time. Families were there, we had providers there, we had a group of men that were there. And Roxanne did a session with the families. We divided the men up, had the men on one side and in one area of the room, and had their families in another area of the rooms. And we talked about like what were some of the barriers to reentry, the fears of going home, things like that. And Roxanne, you make me think about this. Here's what we heard. We heard the men talk about that fear of what the expectations of the family were when they were coming home and what their plans were. We heard the family talk about the expectations of the men, or what the men expected when they came home. And they were on two completely different playing fields. they were all talking about the same issue and the same concern, but that communication was not there. And so they were really, really struggling with that. Everybody wanted their loved one to come home. He wanted to come home. They wanted him home, but they had not done the preparation for the person to come home. So many of those men would have re-entered society without even starting that conversation about me coming home and what that looks like. And that's very important.
You know, Ernest, I really liken this process to maybe getting ready to send your child to college, right? So you've done some tours, you visited, right? You've decided on what you want to do. And so then here comes the fun part. There's some fun in preparation. Let's go get the bedding. Let's get your books. Let's get the micro fridge. Let's, get you all situated. We're even going to help move you in, right? All of that's fun. Everybody's excited. And so, we've really prepared for college. You got good grades, you got your notebooks, your books, blah, 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 blah. And then you go home. You drop him off or drop her off and you go home. So that was the preparation period, and it's not done. Is your child ready to do the work of college? And I feel like there's an analogy there. Is your loved one, and are you ready to do, the family member, the support systems, ready to do the work required of reentry? Because it's not an event, it's a process. It's not accidental, it's deliberate. In the best laid plans, we all know how that goes, right? But I think that when you have a plan, it's easier to maybe detour than it is to just to deal with crisis after crisis.
Absolutely. And, if we could spend some time talking about actually bridging the gap, if we can talk about how do we build the framework around everything that you just shared, Roxanne, and with what Ronnie was talking about. How do we build and begin to construct as a community, as a service provider? How do we begin that framework?
Ernest, I'll tell you that one of the things that we learned during the pandemic is the lack, or how we did not utilize technology to our advantage. And so one of the things that developed out of the pandemic are these re-entry pre-release planning meetings that we were able to have. We particularly geared them toward some of our longer term men and women who have spent time in prison, some of the higher risk cases. But also, I'll give you a good example of how we were able to use this and to kind of build the framework for one particular woman. She had served 27 years in prison, going back to another state. And we knew that it was vital for us, especially with the amount of time she served in prison, to begin building this framework around her. So Roxanne and I got together and talked. The reentry coordinator was a part of that. And we started doing things and organizing things to help her be successful. And so I remember Roxanne pairing her with an advocate that worked with people nationally, or excuse me, a navigator that worked with people nationally. So a mentor. We knew a mentor was important in this relationship. We also knew that her family needed to be on the same page. Her parole officer, because she was going interstate compact, so she had a parole officer in another state. In addition to that, she had a reentry coordinator because that particular Department of Corrections also has a reentry section. So she had a reentry coordinator. So we actually organized a virtual meeting with her. While she was at ORW, the Ohio Reformatory for Women, we invited her daughter, whom she was going to go live with, whom she had been away from for 27 years. Her daughter was a child when she came to prison, and now her daughter is an adult with her own family. We invited the reentry coordinator from the state of Georgia to be a part of the meeting. The parole officer was invited to be a part of the meeting. And then we also discussed with her the navigator that Roxanne paired her with. And then we also discussed Who else is missing from the table? So someone from our office and someone from the prison was there as well. That began the framework of what was necessary, the steps that were necessary for her to be successful. We knew she had to get her state ID prior to leaving Ohio to successfully or to make it easier for her to get a Georgia ID. And so we talked about those steps. We talked about her meeting with her reentry navigator and what that was going to look like. She got to see the person on camera and make that connection. We talked about all those different steps, and we actually built an individual framework around what her success would look like. It's now been almost 2 years that she's out. She works for the state of Georgia now in their mental health department, and she does peer recovery work with the women in the state of Georgia who've experienced many things like she has experienced. So I attribute that not to DRC and what we did, but what the community did, what this community that surrounded her of people, of partners that included us and her family that made that happen.
Wow. Wow. Ronnie, I appreciate you sharing that example, that stern example on how the reentry process, not only from an ODRC perspective, but it's an it needs and requires an all hands on deck approach.
And we always say reentry happens in the community, Ernest. It does. Roxanne and I talk about that all the time. It doesn't mean that we don't believe that DRC bears any responsibility, but we know that true reentry really does happen in the community. We do pre-reentry work in the prisons. We put them in programs, we give them education, we do things to help to prepare them to go home. But the true reentry work happens in the community. And so it's important that preparation is there. It's strong. It's like that foundation that holds the bridge up. And otherwise it may crumble.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. I appreciate that.
Ernest, I'd like to kind of stay in the same vein a little bit as the sending your child to college. And it's not done. So let's say your child, of course, legally as an adult, and they're at college, you're 2 hours, 3 hours away, could be many states away. And your child is exposed to new things. Some of them are great, some of them are uncomfortable. Maybe you're spending some time doing more of this than that when you should be doing that instead of this. Are you putting the time into study? Are you meeting new people? You're having a good social life, but that can be too much. Things can crumble pretty quickly. Like Ronnie said, and I think that for our volunteers or potential volunteers that may be in the workshop, what we want you to know is that what Ronnie said, we're doing pre-reentry in the institutions, pre-entry, okay? But those volunteers, those ambassadors, those friends of reentry, really where men and women need them is in that community, because this is where reentry happens. As Ronnie said, preparation, it may crumble. Maybe you've been gone a long time and you're not really gelling so much living with mom or dad or your brother or your wife who has teenagers and a full schedule, or a sister who working 12-hour shift. You don't know. And so there's unknowns to be experienced with reentry. And I think that those volunteers that we have what, Ronnie, 11,000 volunteers coming into the institutions. And that's great. Honestly, in Roxanne's world, I would like 11 or 20,000 volunteers in the community ready to just take that journey with men and women coming home, just walking with them for a little while, helping them when things crumble, when things go a little bit left to center. Because that preparation sometimes can be overwhelming, because the process of reentry can be really chaotic for men and women. And there's a lot of demands. And I think that the next slide, if you guys are okay, I really kind of want to illustrate a little bit about what that reentry process looks like. Okay, so here's the person being released, right? They're coming home, it's exciting, but then we really want to show the chaos of reentry. So what happens? Your parole officer is telling you, you need to report to my office. And then you have people, your parole officer, your family saying, did you go to treatment? Did you go to your meeting? Are you going to test positive? What's going on? And then you have social services saying, I made an appointment for you. You didn't go. What's going on? I can't get you another appointment, blah, 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 blah. You have a job. Well, why are you always late? What happened? You didn't even show up yesterday. Well, dang, I don't have a car. I didn't have a ride. You know, your family, like, you haven't changed. It's still the same. Your kids are saying, Mom, Dad, when are you going to spend some time with me? Can you take me to school? Will you help me with my homework? Will you come to the church and watch me do my dance? And you have landlords, hey, rent's due. If you can get a place, rent's due, right? While your family's saying you haven't changed, your friends are saying, man, you've changed. It's not the same.
It's so chaotic.
It's chaotic. So there's a lot of things coming. And this is just a small, I think a small snapshot. We haven't even talked about the internal experiences that men and women go through when they come home from incarceration. So these are some of the things that we want our volunteers and potential volunteers to know. There's a lot of things coming at people, and it absolutely can be overwhelming.
Roxanne and I would always talk about, you know, different things that we've experienced working in the prisons. And Roxanne, do you remember we were having a conversation about some of our women going home and their parents have spent years caring for their children, becoming not the grandparents of children, but really being the parents of their children while their mom was incarcerated. And the minute they come home, their parents are ready to hand off the kids to them because they're tired. They have experienced so much. And they weren't expecting to spend their golden years taking care of their children's children. Mm-hmm. And so, but mom's not ready to receive her kids the moment she gets home. She really does need to be stable. And that piece adds even more to the chaos. It adds to the chaos of reentry for that returning mom, but it also adds to the chaos of what the children are experiencing being placed back with mom. We're not saying we don't want mom to get her kids. We're saying we want mom to get her kids when she's able and stable to take care of them.
Wonderful, wonderful. I appreciate that. What I really like about that chaos slide is that it really gives way to what an individual returning home has to go through, not only internally, okay, but externally, what the other people's expectations are. Mm-hmm. They have their parole responsibilities or probation responsibilities. And to me, and I believe this as part of the ODRC's vision, if we don't give way to the pre-entry and invest in that just as much as the re-entry portion that Roxanne was talking about, then those two kind of, it won't be as strong. The bridge won't be as filled and solid for the successful re-entry of the individual person that's returning home. So to that, I asked this question, I posed this question. What do you think the community as a whole, with agencies, not just family, but agencies, other service providers, volunteers as well, maybe nonprofits, can do to kind of bridge that gap and solidify that gap?
Ooh, well, I can tell you that there's a lot of things that we think the communities can do and have been doing, certainly in our state. Because we don't want reentry to look like what we see on the screen. We don't want reentry to be like this. Navigators and mentors are huge. They just are. We have seen the success rate with folks who work with men and women who are coming home. Not just, you know, hey, call me if you need me, but actually walking them through that process, picking them up, you know, helping them navigate through difficult appointments or decision making, understanding that they're going through a lot of things that they didn't expect. There is an excitement, don't get me wrong, about going home, especially after spending several years incarcerated. But sometimes the men and women that we serve are not necessarily prepared for the other things that come. People are judging me. You know, you've been gone for a long time. Now you're at home, you're living with mom, and she's watching your every move. Not because she doesn't love you, but is there possible some concern about that old behavior returning? And is that legitimate? And is that fair on mom's part? Or no one understands what I'm going through. A gentleman last year shared, we served on a panel together. He was someone who was just as involved, and he shared about how he sleeps with his shoes, his keys, his wallet, and everything he needs to just grab his stuff and run by his bed. And his wife didn't understand that. But he talked about the trauma of incarceration and being incarcerated and having to jump up at the last minute at times because things were happening or going on in the facility. And he said, my wife just doesn't understand what I'm going through, and she thinks that I'm going crazy. And then not knowing what to do. I mean, think about it. How many of us find it difficult to navigate some of our systems out there? I know years ago, I had to go get a Social Security card, and I went into the Social Security Administration, and the folks acted as if I should have known what I needed to do in order prior to getting there. And I didn't. And I was frustrated with the system. I know that I've often had difficult times navigating many of our systems. So imagine someone who's been incarcerated, who has not had to navigate these things because we had folks in our system who helped them. And so what I think, Ernest, we need, or where the gaps can be filled is to really help our men and women with some of these situations. And then what?
Okay. And you know, to add to that real quick, Ronnie, I had a gentleman come in today that I got the opportunity to guide through some resources, some community resources in Montgomery County. This gentleman had 30 years down. 29 of that was flat, which means day for day that he had to serve. When I tell you, when his parole officer brought him into my office, and I asked him some questions, this man had fear written all over his face. And everything that you just stated is how he was feeling. And the reason why I know that is because I asked him, I said, hey, is this a concern for you? Is this a concern for you, how society's going to welcome you in or accept you in? It wasn't just a job and getting money. He can do that. He had a trade. He's a skilled barber. But this man had the fear of, how am I going to be accepted back in? And do I have to catch up? How am I going to do it? Technology's changed. The bus line isn't the same. How am I going to get there, right? And to me, that kind of just supports what you just said. You know, as a community, as an institution, we have to understand, or organization, we have to understand these are the concerns, the worries and fears of the justice involved coming home. And how do we feel that? You know, how do we connect, you know, to bridge that gap? So I appreciate you sharing that.
And Ernest, let me just say one more thing before Roxanne moves on. We certainly are appreciative of our partners that come into our facility and provide training and program and things like that. But we know that the need is in the community. And so, you know, when we find people like Willie Knighton, I see Willie Knighton on here. When we find people like Willie Knighton, the reason why we call Willie Knighton all the time, or we hold on to him, or we're always looking to him for assistance, is because he is that person that will walk with that person in the community. He is that person that will help provide those resources. He's that person that we feel like we can safely hand off the men and women that we serve to, and not worry about whether or not they're going to get what they need when they interact with Willie Knighton and his team. And so, and there are many Willie Knightons like that across the state, but we need more Willie Knightons. We need more heroes in the community who are willing to really be there. I always used to say to Roxanne, and you'll probably remember this. I used to say, I appreciate the volunteers that were coming into ORW. At the time, we had over 1,000 volunteers. But I wonder how many of them are really scared to work with our men and women when they come home, because a lot of them would actually move. We wouldn't hear from them. They would say, oh yeah, we provide programming when the person comes home, but then we wouldn't hear from them, or we would never see them again. or they just wanted to come in, but they didn't want to work with them when they come home. And I know there's safety and people feel safer inside our facilities, but if we do what we're supposed to do, if the men and women who are incarcerated do what they're supposed to do, then you will feel safe coming home because they'll be ready for you when they come home. So, again, I appreciate the folks we have. I guess usually I usually say the Glorias like my mom, but I'll say the Willie Knightons because Willie gets it and he does the work.
Mm. And Ronnie, I think it's important to know for anybody new on here who wants to get involved in reentry. I have on the slide, many people need that person. And we all have that person when stuff goes south that we're given a call. But look, people are going to make mistakes. People are going to relapse. They're going to get terminated from jobs. They may get evicted. You just need to know someone's in your corner. In one of the mentoring programs I worked with in Columbus, one of the women had a mentor and she was communicating and then communication dropped off, right? Calls, texts from the mentor, the mentee wasn't responding. And so what do you do? What do you do at that point? Well, the mentor still kept texting. I'm thinking about you. Hope you're well. Can't wait to hear from you. Well, I was told it was a midnight call on a Friday night where the mentee called the mentor and said, I'm using. Okay. What's your U-turn? Where do we go from here? Because that mentor kept reaching out. You weren't lost to me. She obviously knew that there were some problems. The person wasn't responding anymore. But that midnight text message really helped turn things around. It let the woman who was using know she's still in my corner. And so she was building social cash. She had that person. She had someone that she could lean on. And so Ronnie and Ernest, if you don't care, I kind of put in here like a little activity. And Ernest, I'm going to need you to help me do the activity. Okay. So real quick activity, Humpty Dumpty, right? We all know the story about Humpty Dumpty. So if you would utilize the chat feature, when you think about the story of Humpty Dumpty, how do you picture Humpty Dumpty? Throw it in the chat, draw them real quick, throw it up on your screen. Ernest, I want you to tell me what we're seeing a little bit in here. No one's responding. A cracked egg. Okay. Hey, Stan, thank you. And welcome. Good to hear from you. What else? Anyone else? Does anyone concur with Stan? Broken. Nice. Thank you, Jesse. We'll give it a little bit more time. Okay, so Ernest, I want to ask you, I know you're familiar with Humpty Dumpty, right?
Yes.
The nursery rhyme. Was it ever mentioned what Humpty Dumpty looked like? Was it ever mentioned that Humpty
Roxanne,
Dumpty was
there are more comments in the chat if you want to.
Is there?
Oh yeah, a
Oh,
lot
yeah.
more. They're all
Sad and
together.
cracked, precarious, sadness, demoralized. Wow. Okay. Those are good.
Wow.
Nice.
Wonderful.
So, Ernest, I'll go back to my question. Does the story say, does it describe what Humpty Dumpty looked like?
No.
Does it say he's an egg?
No.
It doesn't. In the nursery rhyme, it was never mentioned that Humpty Dumpty was an egg. There's no description of what we look like, but we associate things we are familiar with or describe what we were familiar with. We thought we knew already. We think we know Humpty Dumpty is an egg, but that's not necessarily true, right?
Right.
So we can approach issues of reentry with the same mentality. Oh, I know what they need. Oh, I know what's going on. Maybe you don't. We have to be careful. And I want to say this to everybody working with reentry and myself. We have to be careful not to let our own assumptions provide the narrative around reentry, provide the narrative around an individual. That's what being that person, building that social capital is about. not coming in with presumptions thinking we know. It's important for us to accept the men and women as they are, where they are when they come home. And I love this picture. I've used it 100 times. Willie, I'm sure, recognizes this picture, but this is another wonderful partner. This is Stan. The one point in the hand is Stan, who's a mentor, a friend to everybody in Lucas County, I think. He's an amazing, amazing person. And this is Stan just helping a guy come home, just guiding him. He didn't know what to do, right? He's just guiding him on what needs to happen, because we don't always know. This is the and then what? This is a picture of and then what, folks. This is personal connection. This is building social capital. I like to say we need more Stans, we need more Willies, we need more Marvettas. We need all these folks in the community to really help the men and women with this adjustment coming home.
Roxanne, I say that this is Stan building trust.
Yes.
Because if the trust is not there, they're not going to call you. They're not going to reach out. They're not going to tell you I'm about to use. And so you're absolutely right. And I used the same picture last night when I spoke at the school, because I think it's such a powerful demonstration of and then what.
Stan's going to want us to start paying him for that picture.
Great. So it looks like, and I like this slide as well. It looked like this slide here really explains the format, which isn't that complex or complicated, of the framework required to engage in this work and present an all hands on deck reentry process. Would anyone like to explain this?
Yeah, I think that find your place. What are you good at? What do you like to do? Don't jump in an arena where you're like, oh, I gotta go. If it's about housing, if it's about recovery, if it's about employment, if it's about coaching, find your place. If you want to be involved with reentry, find your bliss and do what makes you happy. And I think
find your passion.
Find your passion, right? Listen, always listen to what the individuals are telling you. Sometimes we have to get out of our own head. Sometimes we have to get out of our own framework.
Roxanne, sometimes too, we have to remember we don't know it all.
We don't.
We don't.
No. And one of the things I like to do, oh, well, then they're going to kick me out, and my parole officer's going to mean this, and I'm going to, well, what? Okay, so let's go down that road. What if that happens? Then what? What if, when you explore the worst case scenario in a rational way, it helps men and women really develop a plan and sometimes see a different route.
Absolutely.
And then support. People need support. They need to feel like they belong. We all have an identity of belongingness, and it's just super critical.
And even the strongest people need support. Oftentimes we think that the people who have it all together don't need support. They do. And I've seen it more recently with a person returning from incarceration. So just remember that even the strongest person needs that support.
Absolutely. Support is essential in all avenues of life, I feel. You know what? We can go on and on about this. Hope is job one. So definitely one of our core values. I want to thank you, Ronnie and Roxanne, for this wonderful session on what if. I think you hit a lot of key elements, questions that our viewers may have had. I want to open it up and take the time just for about 10 minutes to open it up for questioning. So this is our Q&A portion. Maybe you were holding on to a thought. I had a question on involvement. If you could put it in the chat, be glad to ask the question and get you an answer. Okay, so someone said, okay, Man Gang said, will these presentations be made available for download for attendees? I believe, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I believe they will. You will have access to these presentations.
The presentations are being recorded, so they will be available for anyone who's interested.
Fantastic.
So, Ernest, Doug asked how to connect with those preparing to return with opportunities prior to their release. And I think that Ronnie, what you talked about, I think Brian Urbanski had mentioned it. In one of the conversations we had with him about housing provider. Doug is a housing provider.
Yes.
Housing providers coming in, not and touring the institutions, not only to see that these men and women are working hard on their reentry, but to let the incarcerated men and women know there's people out there willing to do this work, and let them connect. And so, Doug, I believe you're in the Akron area, if my memory is
Yeah,
correct.
that's right.
Okay.
And I do
so-
want to do that. I definitely wanna do
Okay,
that.
okay. Well, Doug, we can set you up. I think Brian wants to do that too.
Yeah, Brian is actually working on organizing with a group of housing providers who have an interest in coming into our facilities. It was Brian's idea. He actually shared it last week at the Ohio Ex-Offender Reentry Coalition meeting when he spoke. And I thought it was wonderful. And Brian, if you think about it this morning, I see Brian on here too, it really connected with what Regional Administrator Shelley was saying about wanting us as local partners and state partners to do education around who's going into this housing. So that to me was so key. And Brian, the interesting thing is Roxanne and I worked at the most toured prison in Ohio. The Ohio Reform Tour for Women, when we were there, was the most toured prison in Ohio. And we did tours from everything from legislators to community members, everything. We never once thought about doing tours for housing providers. So Brian, I thought it was an excellent idea. And I'm just so grateful for you bringing that to our attention.
Well, thank
And
you. I
Ronnie-
appreciate. Go ahead, Doug.
Sorry, Ronnie, if I could just add, I think it's good for both sides. I think it's great for those coming out, but it's also good for us because, I mean, Brian and I know these are people just like us.
Mhm.
But the more, I mean, once you look into their eyes and shake their hand, you know, it's your brother or it's your sister, and we want to help them.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I think Doug is bringing up very, very good points certainly for the housing providers to come in and realize, hey, these are real folks, and it's not the stereotypes and the stigmas that many housing providers, myself included, used to have that I used to have back in the day even. And I think on that side, that's important in turning the tide and changing the paradigms of the housing providers. But by the same token, I think it's very crucial for those on the inside to realize, hey, you have hope. We're here. We came here. We took time out of our day to meet with you and to possibly be able to serve your housing needs in the future. And I think it not only does it make them real to us, I think it makes us real to them and gives them a sense of, wow, these folks are serious. When I come out, I can, I may have a place to go immediately. And I think with some of the things that we talked about, like in my program, potentially doing what we like to call a housing scholarship program, or HSP, to be able to provide for those, because you guys are doing this wonderful work with getting people qualified, the CQE program, and I'm hoping maybe there could be a CQH program, a qualified certificate for housing type of situation, or qualified housing credential of some sort that they could work towards. And and I think we can I'm working on developing funding sources for that through our nonprofit, that maybe we can provide opportunities for these folks. And I think that human touch component is very critical, especially since that's what prison is. It's to cut folks off from the rest of society. And I think by us coming in there, we'll not just provide hope, but we'll help them see that there are people out there that are willing to support them in the reentry process.
All right.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Ernest, can I, do you mind if I take one of the questions in the chat here?
Absolutely. I was going to jump on that right away.
Okay. Stan asked about connecting, bridging the gap for that peer-to-peer support and that transition from release to the community. I think one of the ways, and Stan's doing this work, but I think one of the ways for new people to get connected is through reentry coalitions. We have 20, help me, Ronnie, 24 coalitions covering 50 counties throughout the state of Ohio. And I think that getting connected with those coalitions and the citizen circles that are doing this work is a good in. We also do video inreach in our office, which is when we connect virtually to men and women returning to specific regions of the state or areas of the state. And we have partners that get on there, that video inreach and connect virtually to say, hey, I'm so-and-so, we provide housing, here's my number. Does anybody have any questions? So Stan, I think there's a lot of people that can connect through coalitions, can connect through the reentry coordinators for video inreach. Ryan or Ernest, I don't know if you have any other comments you want to make about Stan's question.
I wanted to kind of go back up to Dominica Baisley asked, she says, my returning citizen is a federal inmate going to a halfway house. Do you help federal returnees too, or only state returnees?
So, I mean, we are a state agency. So of course we focus on the men and women returning from state correctional facilities into the community. But let me say this, if I had someone call me and they were a returning citizen from the federal system, I'm not going to tell people no, because the work we do, this is mission work. And we have to understand that regardless of what system somebody's returning to, they are returning to our communities. And we are responsible for helping everybody. We're going to live in the community. So I can't really decipher and say, well, no, I'm not going to help you because you're from the federal system. Absolutely not. It's my hope also that the halfway house, they have staffing and that their staff will also provide services to that person, but we're not going to turn people away because they came from a different system. It's just not what we do and who we are. And I think that's a great question, Dominica.
Very good. It looks like someone tried to piggyback off of what Brian was alluding to, a possible CQH, having that conversation. Someone said, I heard there's a possibility of that. Does anyone want to speak on that?
So we do have several groups working on CQHs or the concept of a CQH, whether it'll be called that or not. We have an executive leadership team within our agency that's working on a concept for that will actually be presenting the beginning of November to our executive leaders of our agency. And from their entire project, their project is on housing, and they've had an opportunity to meet with Doug Stern and Brian Urbanski on here and some of the other folks. But in addition to that, there's a group out of Franklin County that was working on CQHs specific to Franklin County, as well as we have some legislative support from Representative Humphrey and Representative Seitz. So we're excited about the fact that everybody is having this discussion about the importance of housing in Ohio and reentry. And so I'll just tell you all to give us a few more weeks, maybe a few more months, and we should be our plan is to all work together. And so we should be working together to come up with something to share with Ohio. But CQH, is the certificate of qualification for housing, is something that is very, very important to a lot of folks across the state. So,
hey, can I make a quick comment on that and then a quick question? I'm going to say, I'm not hearing anything, so I'm going to say that's yes,
sure.
Right?
Yes.
So please continue to use us on that front, Ronnie, as far as giving feedback. You know, I know Brian would also welcome that. But my question is, so you're a little bit familiar with Sunup Foundation, our foundation. So we're looking to provide housing for re-entering citizens. And I guess you talked a lot about re-entering citizens coming home to family. And I think, and I don't know what the population is, like what percentage is going home versus going somewhere. And can you talk a little bit to we want to provide a safe place for somebody who doesn't have that support at home. We want to provide them a home. Can you talk about a little bit of the difference of the needs? And then when they're going, man, I'm alone in society, how do we help them best?
So, you know, it's difficult for us to quantify or put numbers to how many people are returning home to family and how many people are returning home essentially homeless or will need a place to stay, because we don't track those numbers within our agency. But Roxanne and I both can tell you, and many of our staff that work across the state can tell you about experiencing men and women with both. Even sometimes folks with family don't necessarily need to or should return to that family because it's not a healthy environment. It's not a safe environment for them to return to. And so we definitely know the numbers are out there. We see it every day. We saw a lot of it during the height of the pandemic, which Doug, for me, was very sad, and I'll tell you why. Because we had one instance where a young man was being picked up, a family, they had agreed to pick him up, and it was the height of the pandemic, and we all had a lot of fear around COVID-19, especially not knowing much about it. They showed up at the facility to pick him up. He came out to the parking lot, got ready to get into the car, and I think they just got nervous about the pandemic, and so made a decision right then and there that he could not come home, and they left. And so our staff were left at the facility with finding him a safe place to be that night, because we couldn't keep him. We're not allowed to just bring people back into the facility and house them until they have a place to go, unless they're on supervision, and it's a certain type of supervision, then if it was a parole. But in this case, it was not, and he had a expirated stated term, so we had to release him. And so that's when we start calling on our partners, like many of you, saying, here's the situation, we need help. And our partners came through for us in that particular case. And so that's just one case, and that was pretty extreme. But we have other people who have a difficult time in finding stable, supportive housing. And so that's why we are excited about the opportunities to work with you and Brian and other housing providers across the state. John Rush in Franklin County has been amazing. And then Montgomery County is doing a lot of stuff. They have a great housing committee there as part of their Montgomery County Office of Reentry Council. So just the need is definitely there, but we don't have the numbers to quantify it because it's just not something that our agency has tracked. And it may be something that we'll talk about tracking in the future. What makes it difficult is that people who are not on supervision do not have to tell us where they're going to live. They're not required to. We're only required to know where the people who we actually have legal authority to supervise in the community to live.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Great question.
Fantastic. Any other questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to Doug's question. My name is Stanley Frankart. I have the privilege of working with those who have been justice involved. I myself coming from the justice involved experience as well. And we've been trying to begin to quantify these numbers of people that are released to family or directly just released to like halfway houses, things like that from our service point of view. I also am a housing provider and work with privatized landlords through the CTP program, which is known as the Community Transitions Program and Returning Home Ohioans. And so what we have seen, at least on our grassroots, ground level, is that about 78% of individuals are either released on the brink of homelessness or homeless. And so essentially what I mean by that is they're either sleeping on somebody's couch with a deadline, or they are being released tentatively to like halfway houses. I've even seen in some scenarios people being released to like homeless shelters in the hopeful expectation that a local housing provider can be able to navigate that experience with them. So that's kind of what we've been seeing grassroots level. Again, I would say majority of those people that are released to family members, just because of the previous experiences, the lifelong of burning bridges, things like that, it happens. Family members are fed up. And so they have a deadline to be off of that couch. And so typically I've seen anywhere from like 6 months to 3 months. We're working with an individual right now who had 30 days to figure it out. And it's tough, especially for somebody who's navigating, a compromised background, trying to find landlords and things like that are willing to work with those unique barriers. But, I would attribute it to God's grace and lots of prayer and great community partners that, we've been able to navigate that and working with privatized landlords like yourself, Doug, and people who are willing to make some changes. So that's just ground, level grassroots from what we see. I just wanted to share that number because I know that's a number that's hard to quantify and track. We've been trying to do so just by our, one-on-one, peer-to-peer relationships we have with individuals. And so that's kind of what we've been noticing just from our roots level.
Hey,
Thanks,
Stan,
Stanley.
will you share with everybody what area you're from and what area you service to? We know it,
Yes.
but they don't know it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Young Christian Professionals is the nonprofit organization. We are a reentry organization that is peer driven. Everybody on our team is coming from lived experience, having navigated incarceration and reentry. And so we work close with people like that all over the state of Ohio, from Cleveland down to Cincinnati. And then with the Licking County Coalition for Housing, in which I serve through the Community Transitions Program and Returning Home Ohioans, we service 10 different counties here in the state of Ohio, from Richland County all the way down to Muskegum and Licking County. And so, that's a whole geographical central Ohio location. And, if you are from another area, I would be blessed and honored to be able to connect you to somebody who can help you navigate whatever services you're looking for in that area.
You see why we love Stan so much?
Absolutely. Bringing that energy, that fire.
right.
You can feel his passion. I love it. So, as we kind of wind down in our session, don't want to exclude anyone that has any further questions. But you will get a copy of this, and you are open to sharing your contact information if you would like or have more questions on how to get involved. I really want to take the time to thank our panelists. I want to thank you, Ronnie Burks, Trousdale, and Roxanne Coy, for taking the time to not only break down and dissect, but to navigate and connect the importance of the entire re-entry process in terms of, and then what? Because a lot of people just don't know. They're new to the re-entry space and they just don't know what all it entails. And really it entails everybody. I know Roxanne, you say it all the time, Ronnie beats it into us all the time. Listen, it requires everybody. Okay, and I've also been told by my boss, I'm privileged to have Ronnie as my boss, no one goes home homeless. And that's her creed, and she pushes that, and we push that because we have to. And I think it's important, the work that Stanley's doing, Doug, Brian, it's an all hands on deck approach. So please join us in this mission, continue your mission, connect with someone, because if we're looking in the same direction and we're really serious about our communities, we can nip this thing called recidivism at the bud every time. And it may not go down to zero, but we can put a dent in it with all hands on deck approach. So I want to thank everyone. Please note that we're going to move into our lunch break at this time. We will be reconvening at 12:15 to 1:15 for the lunch and learn, and that'll be with guided discussion. So again, thank you, Ronnie and Roxanne, for your time. Thank all of the participants. Thank you for coming, and we look forward to working with you in the near future. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you, Ernest.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye.